Get ready, everyone. The news cycle never sleeps, and neither do we. Tom's Spotlight is back with another lightning-fast rundown of what's making headlines, shaping conversations, and absolutely asterisk must be on your radar. We're talking major shifts, unexpected turns, and stories that are already buzzing. You won't want to miss a second of this. First up, a highly anticipated cinematic revisit that's got everyone talking. Then, we dive into a surprising twist on a familiar narrative. We've also got a deep dive into a film that's sparking debate about its bold storytelling. And finally, we're breaking down a cinematic offering that's being hailed for its sharp wit and stellar performances. Stay tuned, because it's all happening right here, right now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. A transatlantic tale of turmoil. This cinematic update brings a classic story of marital conflict back to the screen, starring acclaimed actors Benedict Cumberbatch and Olivia Colman. Long before it was a novel or a hit movie in the 1980s, historians knew the Wars of the Roses as a brutal 15th-century English civil war between the houses of Lancaster and York, each identified by their heraldic flowers. More than 5 centuries later, Warren Adler borrowed that name for his 1981 novel The War of the Roses, a darkly comic look at a marriage in meltdown. Danny DeVito's 1989 film adaptation, with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, cemented the story's reputation as the ultimate divorce-from-hell comedy. Now comes a new version, simply titled The Roses, which partly returns the tale to its British roots. Benedict Cumberbatch and Olivia Colman star as Theo and Ivy Rose, a couple who meet, marry, and start a family in the UK before relocating to the United States. He's a successful architect in California, overseeing the construction of a flashy museum. She's a former chef turned full-time mother, devoting herself to their 2 children. The film opens with the Roses in therapy, a glimpse of what's to come, but for a good stretch they seem like a happy, functional family. That shift in emphasis marks the main difference between this adaptation and earlier ones. Rather than plunging headlong into divorce combat, director Jay Roach, best known for the Austin Powers and Meet the Fockers films, spends much of the running time establishing the Roses as a couple. Only near the end does the movie descend into open warfare, and that tonal change feels at odds with the sly, cultural clash comedy that precedes it. Up until then, The Roses plays almost like a tart transatlantic sitcom, mining humor from an English couple navigating life in sunny California before slowly realizing they may not be meant for each other. The unraveling begins subtly. Encouraged by Theo, Ivy opens a seafood restaurant that initially struggles, while he celebrates the grand opening of his museum project. One stormy night changes everything. Hurricane-force winds destroy Theo's museum, costing him his job, while a detour caused by the same storm brings a famed food critic to Ivy's restaurant, launching her success. Their fortunes flip, resentment creeps in, and soon he's the stay-at-home dad obsessively training their children in athletics, while she becomes a thriving business owner. Even the dream home he designs and she pays for begins to feel more like a battleground than a refuge. Roach takes plenty of liberties with Adler's original story, and in many ways the film is stronger for it. Some of the sharpest scenes pit the Roses, acerbic, sarcastic, very British, against their Californian friends, played by Andy Samberg and Kate McKinnon, among others. Samberg's character, their lawyer, echoes the role DeVito played in the original, while the couple's bizarre social outings, including a surreal trip to a shooting range, provide some of the movie's funniest moments. For much of the film, Cumberbatch and Colman excel at weaponizing irony and barbed wit, finding strength as a couple by standing apart from less cynical Americans around them. But the tone eventually curdles. What begins as cutting sarcasm slides into cruelty, contempt, and finally physical violence, and that's where The Roses falters. The film loses much of its bite once it abandons verbal sparring for flying objects and slapstick brutality. Roach Americanizes the conflict, and neither Colman nor Cumberbatch are as compelling in broad, destructive mayhem as they are when their daggers are purely verbal. The result is a movie that's at its sharpest when it diverges from Adler's original, and at its weakest when it circles back to it. Audiences are divided, with some praising the fresh take and performances, while others find the tonal shift jarring. Prepare for a deep dive into the cinematic world, where a familiar story gets a surprising, star-studded update. Next, we'll explore another take on this narrative, focusing on directorial choices and comedic impact. A Tale of Two Marriages, the original versus the remake. This review critiques a new adaptation of The War of the Roses, comparing its comedic approach and directorial choices to Danny DeVito's iconic 1989 film. It needs to be said, Danny DeVito is underrated as a comedy director. The movie star turned It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia savior is certainly best known for a long list of film and television appearances, including Taxi, that are outrageously, unforgettably funny. But he's also helmed such memorable movies as the whimsical Matilda, the twisted strangers on a train parody Throw Mama from the Train, the cruelly underrated Barney-inspired Death to Smoochie, and the hot comedy The War of the Roses. In fact, the Shadow DeVito cast is so long that even as I discuss a remake of The War of the Roses that he has nothing to do with, I can't help but herald his contribution to comedy, in part because DeVito would never have given us the roses. Look, on paper, The Roses sounds sensational. Adapted from the same Warren Adler novel as DeVito's 1989 The War of the Roses, this modern screenplay is written by Tony McNamara, whose scripts for The Favorite and Poor Things earned him Oscar nominations and critical acclaim. Promisingly, The Roses reunites him with Olivia Colman, the Academy Award-winning comedic dark star of The Favorite, and an actress who's been cracking this critic up since the British series Peep Show. And she's paired opposite Benedict Cumberbatch, who is less known for comedy but has been mixing it up with films like The Phoenician Scheme and The Grinch. Adding a generous slathering of comedy chops, the supporting cast is stacked with the likes of Andy Samberg, Kate McKinnon, Allison Janney, Sunita Mani, Ncuti Gatwa, Jamie Demetriou, and Zoe Kao. The Roses should be wall-to-wall laughs, ranging from giggles to guffaws to shocked gasps. And yet, this just isn't all that funny. I blame director Jay Roach. DeVito's The War of the Roses is framed as a parable against divorce, told by the director himself, who plays the central couple's friend and a divorce attorney who serves as a sage narrator across the decades-long rise and fall of the Roses. From the start, McNamara's approach goes for something different by introducing a framing voiceover by the Roses themselves, Ivy Colman and Theo Cumberbatch. In sing-song voices, they reflect on how the film will end, true to the first movie, but with a surprisingly upbeat attitude. While there will be a twist on this voiceover's context, this chipper change does reflect the overall tonal shift from the biting 1989 version and the bizarrely bouncy 2025 remake. The general plot is the same. Theo was once the breadwinner of their household, while his wife, a baking genius who could make amazing culinary constructions modeled after landmarks, cared for their two kids who have gotten too chubby for Theo's liking. When his career takes an unexpected downturn, hers is on the rise, and resentments grow. He takes on raising their kids, turning them away from sweets and toward sprints. She is working long hours and experiencing an adult world that feels increasingly distant from Theo. When divorce comes, it's acrimonious and centered on who will get their dream house. The new twist here is that the husband is an architect who built his dream house with the profits from his wife's restaurants. So, Theo doesn't want to give up his masterpiece, and she, bitter over the split, doesn't want to give him it exactly because he wants it. In DeVito's, the husband was a lawyer whose wife bought and led the renovations on their home, which he paid for. An increasingly immature series of pranks becomes increasingly dangerous and even deadly. And while some dialogue and certain ploys at revenge hit hard, many of the jokes don't land. What happened? To Roach's credit, he succeeds in establishing Ivy and Theo as a couple once ravenously in love. The scene of their first meeting feels exciting and hot, climaxing with the pair rushing into a restaurant's freezer for a quickie before they've even shared their names. This irreverence for common decorum surfaces throughout the film, reflecting a shared impulsiveness as they exchange barbs brutal but funny even to each other, or ditch a dull dinner party by faking an utterly bizarre emergency. Cumberbatch and Colman have solid chemistry in such scenes, and both have the devastating intensity to make McNamara's most stinging lines land. But the tone that Roach offers is just achingly middle of the road. Punches feel pulled at nearly every turn. A mean comment is almost immediately undercut by an emotional catharsis, be it a burst of screaming or a jaunty justification. Roach's Roses lacks the gothic flair of DeVito's, which had its stars perform with an almost soap opera-like theatricality as they spat invectives against a rollicking musical score, which played like a storm brewing. By contrast, Roach's tone is broader, in the vein of his hits like Meet the Parents or his similarly lackluster remake Dinner for Schmucks. The flair, daffiness, and daring he brought to Austin Powers is long behind him, and The Roses is the worse for its absence. Not until the final act do the Roses amp up their war to the blisteringly comic levels teased in the trailer, and by then it feels too little too late in terms of verve or style. Worse still, the transition from bouncy American comedy with occasional mean jokes feels downright jarring when it comes to the point where they're actually aiming to kill each other. Rather than the inevitable path DeVito's lawyer once warned us of, this last act of The Roses just feels like we've walked into a different movie altogether. Throughout the film, Roach seems to regret taking on a dark comedy, peppering his cast with comedians far more known for goofiness than wilting wit. Samberg is in the DeVito role of the husband's friend lawyer, but is saddled with a barrage of cliched asides about the inertia of marriage. Even his signature warmth and silliness can't shake off the cobwebs of such dusty jokes. His partner on-screen is fellow SNL alum McKinnon, who, though she was a wondrous scene stealer in Barbie, is actually exhausting here, beating a one-note joke into the ground. As a horny wifey, she wants to bang Cumberbatch's Theo. It's her only character trait besides being awkward. And whether it's flirtations that are vaguely threatening or done in front of her husband as brazen emasculation, they just aren't funny, even in a cringe sensibility. Yet Roach treats this thread like rich terrain, endlessly giving McKinnon screen time to flirt clumsily, but never hilariously. Other comedic talents are likewise misused. Sunita Mani, Death of a Unicorn, and Encuti Gatwa, Doctor, who have bit parts as Ivy's loyal sous chef and head waiter, mugging possibly more often than they actually get lines. Jamie Demetriou, a master of offbeat comedy, and Zoe Kao, who shined in The Afterparty, get only a couple of scenes as an annoying couple who can't read social cues. The only scene where supporting players bring the heat this comedy desperately needs is when Allison Janney and Samberg face off in a scene that's very reminiscent of a marriage story. Samberg is the bumbling male attorney cowed by the ferocious female lawyer, who is equal amounts vicious and step-on-my-neck sexy as hell. Janney is perfectly cast and makes a meal out of every diva-like line. Joan Crawford would be proud. While Cumberbatch is committed, Colman is a heavier hitter when it comes to nasty comedy. His cutting remarks score the occasional chuckle, but hers land like you'd expect from a royal bitch, like her queen in The Favorite, devastating and regal. In these moments, we see a glimpse of what this could have been for the Roses. But Roach seems scared of giving his audience some truly detestable characters, so at every turn their bitterness is undercut by sidekicks yucking it up or an earnest attempt to even the scales with a new emotional twist or revealed vulnerability. All this softening blunts the cutting comedy that was the dark heart of DeVito's The War of the Roses. No, I never read the book. And here, it feels less dark and more a tad saucy. A comedy about a couple gone so toxic that they're actively competing to murder each other over their dream house should be more dynamic, darker, and damned funny. The Roses by any other name would still be a middling comedy, but compared to the caustic and sexy 89 Gem, it can't shine. The Roses opens in theaters Aug. 28. This review suggests that while the film has strong performances and witty dialogue, director Jay Roach's choices dilute the dark comedy, making it less impactful than its predecessor. Moving from a critical comparison of cinematic adaptations, we now shift focus to a film that, despite its narrative choices, is praised for its human element. Next, we'll explore a review that highlights a specific narrative choice that has sparked discussion about its realism. Marital dynamics and a curious omission. This review examines the contemporary relevance of The Roses, highlighting its human portrayal of marital struggles and a notable plot hole. Directed by Jay Roach. Starring Benedict Cumberbatch, Olivia Colman, Andy Samberg, Allison Janney, Belinda Bromolo, Sunita Mani, Encuti Gatwa, Jamie Demetriou, Zoe Kao, Kate McKinnon. Photo, Jop Bjotendijk. B.Y. Rachel Ho published Aug 25, 2025. Where Danny DeVito's 1989 film, The War of the Roses sits precariously in the dark comedy genre, an updated adaptation of Warren Adler's novel starring Benedict Cumberbatch and Olivia Colman decidedly presses upon the comedy more than the darkness. Directed by Jay Roach, The Roses does what most remakes fail to do: actually find new meaning in an old story within a contemporary context. The War of the Roses, Adler's novel and DeVito's film, set its focus on the anger that grows during a divorce proceeding. Jonathan and Barbara Rose go from crazy lovebirds to happily married to dropping chandeliers on one another in the blink of an eye. Roach's interpretation of Adler's material, though, considers the resentment that grows in a marriage as life's circumstances changes dynamics. Cumberbatch and Colman portray Theo and Ivy Rose, a British couple living in California. When the two first meet in New York, Ivy works as a line cook in a swanky restaurant who dreams of moving to the Golden State. But after having children, Ivy's professional ambitions take a backseat to her personal ambitions as a mother, for which she has no regrets. Theo, being the ever-progressive husband, recognizes in his wife the still-present desire to thrive as a chef, telling her, "The amazing chef that you are and have always wanted to be should not be a dream that dies on the crucifix of family life." Using the money made from a recent high-profile account, Theo, an accomplished architect, buys a rundown beachside shack, which Ivy names We've Got Crabs, and she runs the restaurant in a part-time manner while still prioritizing her duties as a mom. On the same night that she receives a glowing review that makes the shack the current local hotspot, Theo suffers a very public and devastating professional setback, making him unemployable for the foreseeable future. The couple decide that Ivy should work full-time and see through the good publicity of We've Got Crabs, and Theo will stay home and take care of their children. The dynamic shifts are predictable and expected. Theo takes to being a full-time father seamlessly, and Ivy begins to feel like a fourth wheel to her family, while Theo's career goals continues to nag at him. Roach and Tony McNamara's script updates Adler's approach to marriage in a 21st century setting by placing both partners as potential breadwinners and both partners supportive of the other. Cumberbatch and Colman are given far more nuanced characters to portray than what Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner were given in 1989. Theo and Ivy, at their core, love each other and the life they've built together as husband and wife. However, they both struggle immensely as individuals, and, as time wears on, these struggles threaten their family. At one point, Theo suggests switching back, as was always their plan, which is when the most curious aspect of the Roses rears its head. The conversations had between Ivy and Theo about this topic make it seem as if their only option is for one to work and the other to stay home. It's never contemplated or even mentioned that both of them could work, the reality for countless households around the world. For an update that genuinely feels fresh and thoughtful, Roach and McNamara oddly leave this gaping hole. In Adler's book and DeVito's movie, the Roses hire a live-in nanny. In the Roses, though, the decision is binary. One parent works and one parent stays at home, even with the kids in high school. This head-scratcher doesn't bring down the film's humor or layered character arcs. It simply leaves a massive plot point wanting for answers, or even just an acknowledgement. Notwithstanding the Roses' allergy to a dual-income household, the film finds its step through two actors whose pairing isn't immediately obvious, but their easy chemistry sets aside any misgivings. Their innate Britishisms contrast the very American comedy of Andy Samberg and Kate McKinnon, creating a melting pot of sensibilities. It would be inaccurate to say that The Roses is a British comedy, but it wouldn't exactly be correct to call it an American one either, as its comedy reflects the titular couple's transplant circumstance. The lack of vitriol offers the most welcome and encouraging change from DeVito's movie. The subject matter of the story remains devastating, as many of us will see Ivy and Theo's bubbling hostility in our own lives. But Roach's ability to find humor and slapstick in such bleak moments and maintain his character's love for the other makes The Roses strangely human. Despite a notable plot hole regarding dual-income households, the film is praised for its nuanced characters and the chemistry between its leads, offering a humanized take on marital conflict. Having discussed the nuances of modern marriage in film, we now turn to a review that emphasizes the sharp dialogue and comedic performances that define this particular cinematic offering. Next, we'll explore a review that highlights the comedic prowess of the leads and the supporting cast, as well as the director's stylistic approach. Sharp dialogue meets broad comedy. This review praises the film's sharp writing and strong lead performances, while critiquing the director's broader comedic approach. The idea of a J. Roach, Meet the Parents, helmed, British-coded adaptation of Warren Adler's marital farce novel, The War of the Roses, penned by Tony McNamara. The favorite, Poor Things, is so bizarre. I haven't read the novel, nor have I seen Danny DeVito's 1989 adaptation, which I hear is very cinematic and visually creative, but from what I have gathered, the premise is like the Banshees of Inisherin and Phantom Thread for married American couples. And now we have this version from one of the best scribes of insane insults in film today. In the form of a rather slow-burning dramedy, The Roses is a contemporary, very British portrayal of marriage, validation, desire, and passion that is sharp when it isn't overshadowed by director J. Roach's bland flair. Image copyright courtesy of Searchlight Pictures. MPA rating: R for crude sexual material, violence, bloody images, and brief partial nudity. Runtime: 1 hour and 45 minutes. Production companies: South of the River Pictures, Sunny March, Delirious Media. Distributor: Searchlight Pictures. Director: J. Roach. Writers: Tony McNamara. Cast: Benedict Cumberbatch, Olivia Colman, Andy Samberg, Kate McKinnon, Allison Janney, Belinda Bromelo, Sunita Mani, Ncuti Gatwa, Jamie Demetriou, Zoe Kao, Hala Finley. Release date: August 29, 2025. Theo, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Ivy, Olivia Colman, had a match each other's freak meet cute at a restaurant in Britain and instantly U-hauled from Britain to Mendocino, California. 10 years later, they are happily married with twins and content in stable jobs. Theo is a beloved architect and Ivy owns a seafood restaurant, Got Crabs, which barely gets any customers. But when a storm hits, it disrupts the calm of their careers. One of Theo's buildings collapses and Ivy's shop receives an unexpected rave review from a food critic. Following this, Theo is fired from his job and becomes a stay-at-home dad, while Ivy becomes an overnight culinary great. Resentment and neglect begin to bubble between the spouses, and the two must face dangerous turning points of their marriage. Following his many period scripts, The Roses is Tony McNamara at his most contemporary, retexturing a classic story for the digital age. The Roses is a fine update that finally deconstructs the trials of a marriage rooted in insecurity, letting petty squabbles brew through sheer, sharp, and biting dialogue. McNamara satirizes aspects unique to our modern living, with jokes stemming from viral videos breaking careers and smart appliances being a hell to live with, while staying true to the richness of Adler's texts with his cunning humor. The novelty of this examination lies in part in McNamara's simmering, pressure cooking, slow burn. The Roses is a multi-year narrative that explores these characters' gradual resentment. You feel the weight of their marriage cracking at the seams with each blindsided lack of support for their partner, whether it be ego or lack of validation. It's a study and deconstruction of characters facing a tumultuous turning point within their relationship, precipitated by the shift in their careers. The foundation of love is still omnipresent, but the career shift throws a big wedge in their dynamic. Throughout, there are abundant, very funny, albeit sad, scenes of the two trying and failing to show up for each other romantically. Unlike the original story, the catalyst here isn't Theo experiencing a near-death experience, but rather the insecurities he faces from not being an architect anymore. The not-so-titular war doesn't commence until very late in the story, and when it occurs, it feels so investing and earned. The Roses is funny, but not as rip-roaringly hysterical as McNamara's previous works. However, when McNamara applies his cunning to notable scenes from the source, his writing and the lead's performances really shine. This is the guy who made every audience I've seen watch The Favorite go ooh-ooh over Olivia Colman's Queen Anne saying, "I like it when she puts her tongue inside me, like the best yo mama disser ever." His dialogue is cutting, and his insults are devastating, especially when they come from an earned place of bubbling resentment. So when those twisted insults fly, cutting deep, there's a sense of catharsis backed up with each laugh. The Roses is a major two-hander comedic showcase for Colman and Cumberbatch who shine in this marital portrait. I've personally found myself growing weary by Colman's misdirecting comedic styling, where she delivers the most insane thing you've ever heard with a cheery demeanor. At this point, it feels like typecasting. Yet, McNamara gives Ivy a well-rounded personality. She feels the stress and pain of her newfound success, and Colman realizes her very groundedly. She and Cumberbatch are on equal grounding every scene, as Theo's dry, aloof personality goes well with Ivy's. Benedict Cumberbatch's Theo is a despondent, pathetic, wormy little shit. Early on, you empathize with him being stripped of his profession he dedicated his life to. Naturally, he becomes increasingly pathetic, but Cumberbatch's sublime portrayal of great comical physicality and comic timing renders him a fun loser to watch. The Roses also benefits from its supporting players who make their time the most of it. Kate McKinnon and Andy Samberg are often funny, as Amy and Bari, the least convincing straight couple. Sunita Mani and American-accented Ncuti Gatwa as Ivy's millennial employees share some good dialogue. Then, a Theo-feuding Jamie Demetriou and Bubby Zoe Ko as an architect couple make an intense dinner scene even funnier. Allison Janney is the Roses' scene stealer. She's in a scene as Ivy's divorce lawyer where she goes for Theo's throat, dominating with her dry, serious presence, an unnecessary dog by her side to amplify her assertiveness. It's one of the movie's standout sequences. The Roses plays like a 2010s studio comedy, which strains it from greatness. The film is significantly broader and more meandering than it deserves due to Jay Roach's pedestrian direction. He lets the supporting comedic player ad-lib to their heart's content, and it's heavily felt as their American sensibilities work as a fun contrast to the Roses' British attitude. But comically, it's very discordant. While they are funny, many of the comedic scenes with Samberg and McKinnon, whom I love, are padded out. Particularly the running gag of Amy wanting to bone Theo. I get they are great comic actors, but you have a flawless Tony McNamara script right there. It brought back a lot of my problems with Dinner for Schmucks or even Meet the Parents, where the character actor's mugging of the camera stretches the runtime and undermines the plot. Here it undermines the set dark tone, and it's extremely bothersome for much of the movie, hence it not being as consistently funny to its fullest potential. The Roses is a darkly funny marital comedy, with Cumberbatch and Colman delivering sharp, two-handed comic performances, thanks to Tony McNamara's biting script. Randy Jones, he is a film and television journalist born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. They are the owner of self-published independent outlet, Rihanna Radar, a member of the Critics' Choice Association, GALECA, and NYFCO. They have been seen in Entertainment Weekly, Vanity Fair, Roger Ebert, and Paste. This review highlights the film's successful blend of sharp dialogue and comedic performances, particularly from its leads, while noting that director Jay Roach's broader comedic style sometimes detracts from the film's darker undertones. We've explored various critical perspectives on The Roses, from its narrative structure to its comedic execution. Now, we'll wrap up our coverage with a quick recap of the top stories and a reminder to stay connected with us for more. In review, The Roses offers a fresh take on marital strife with strong performances, but a tonal shift some critics found jarring. Another review highlighted the film's witty dialogue and the chemistry between its leads, though it noted director Jay Roach's choices sometimes diluted the dark comedy. A third perspective pointed out the film's human portrayal of marriage and its star's chemistry, alongside a peculiar plot omission regarding household income. Finally, a review praised the sharp writing and comedic talent, but felt the director's broader approach sometimes overshadowed the intended dark humor. That's all for today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Tom's Spotlight for more, hit that notification bell, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and follow us on all social media platforms to stay updated on everything happening in the world.